Can we internet? Can we internet? Okay. I believe Comcast has stopped being a derp, and we now have internet powers once again. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's been a wild week for me, and I'm 2 days into it. Work's been a little crazy, but sorry for the delay. Comcast decided it was an ample time to just like reset everything, and they take a long time to recover sometimes when they do that. So here we are, a few minutes late. The good news is Dr. Black tonight's going to be a little late, so we can run a little long and make up for that. So first off, I really want to, I know, haircut, right? I don't have like the discount Doc Brown thing going on anymore. Clay commented, I really had to get a haircut because there were certain hats that I own that I couldn't wear because they're too tight on my head because I had too much hair. So I had to change that right up. All right, so I want to talk on a couple things real fast, and I'll try to make them quick just because we've had the delay, and then we'll get into Q&A. But number one, you guys can see that Redfish Bluefish is in chat. We had our little interview last Saturday. It released. I think we got together 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I tried to like release that video quite a bit quicker than I normally do, mostly because I thought people would like it. Also, Jason's in the middle of like his live streams talking about the process of going through putting his fish store together. And right now with COVID and all that stuff, right, it's going to be mostly an online thing once it's going. But physical brick and mortar store, there will be the ability to get in there, right? But yeah, he's got tanks with water. Actually, we've been talking the last couple days. We kind of secured a couple things. I spoiled this to the members early, and I'll spoil some of it to you guys now. Yes, Papa Limo, I'm spoiling it to the audience. If he barks in the background, I'm sorry. So we've come to a initial agreement, which is that clearly we need to get some of my guppies in the hands of some of you folks, and my ability to ship is goose egg, right? I typically am in at work before the post office opens, and I don't leave work with the exception of streams until the post office closes. With the way USPS, especially, that's how I would ship. It's the most economical for people as a person that doesn't regularly ship. Having huge delays, you basically can only do overnight express. So shipping on a Saturday doesn't work because now that overnight doesn't help you. But if you ship normal priority, what a bunch of people have seen happening, like I've talked to Bob Steenfott recently about this, and even the co-op folks have noticed that things that would take 2 days are taking 3 to 4. Things that would take 3 days are taking like 5, sometimes more. And with fish, the longer they're in the mail, there's a risk, especially when you're somebody who doesn't ship fish regularly, like me. So you're relying on less effective methods. We'll put it that way. Like, I still think breather bags are really effective, but they're not as good as, say, like the Dan's Fish method, where they're like double bagged and every fish is in an individual bag, right? That professional level of shipping. So, yeah, we will be at a very minimum putting in some blue Hawaiian Moscow guppies into Jason's hands, and once he's up and running, we'll make those one of the first fish that he has available for sale. And the goal here, again, basically whatever I probably would have sold them at normally, I'm going to do my best to make sure that Jason can sell them at that price too. So, I will be selling him guppies for way less than I would if I shipped them, but he's got to do all the work, right? So it makes fair. And basically it's an excuse to go back out to the shop because I want to go out there when there's no smoke, because that area, just even with the smoke, it's hard to tell on camera. It's just gorgeous out there. So an ability to get out there before the weather turns too much in this area where it's just like constant rainfall, I'm down for that. So there's that. Number two, I got some new fish in recently, and I put a video on Instagram this morning. Members have seen these and know the species, but I won't tell you guys species yet. We're going to play a little game. And members, try not to spoil the species, please. I know you guys know, but here we go. So there's a rainbow video that came out this morning. Might be hard to tell what they are, but a couple of them you can see little touches of orange. Here's the other fish that I have in, and more importantly, I actually have breeding pairs of this fish, so I will have young probably soon, because they're something that breeds pretty fast. We'll put it up on the screen for, say, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that. So that's a pleco, right? An ancistrus species, which means it's a algae and vegetable eating pleco. Not super common, but really, really cool fish. Hopefully my internet stays stable. I see some crazy things happening in my preview. Sorry if some little hiccups happen. Comcast is being real terrible in this area. So if you see them, my apologies, guys. I'm going to do that up front. Normally, my internet is really, really, really solid. But Comcast apparently decided this is the week to mess everything up. So there's your picture. Hopefully you guys saw it long enough. If you're a non-member, you're welcome to guess the species. Again, that's an ancistrus species, which means it's a algae-eating pleco. And I can confirm this because 4 of them at juvenile size, so, you know, about, inch and a half or so, inch and a half, absolutely demolished the algae in a tank, which is going to help me kind of cheat and do an experiment before I move them. And yeah, I definitely needed to top off my fluval behind me, but I've been busy. I had to do a lot of water changes on all my tanks downstairs. So this guy kind of gets the last because it evaporates the least, has the least like shifts and parameters. It kind of gets the, not neglect, but the last treatment. So there's those, and those fish, whenever I have babies, most likely I'll probably talk to Jason too about those, although I've also talked to Bob Steenfott, because in the case of plecos, right, you can only sell so many of them, or a lot of times you only want so many of them, so depending on how many babies my breeding group starts shooting out, we'll have a certain amount. Hoon Aquatics is up in the joint. Hoon Aquatics has the lucky distinction of being one of the few that owns Melanitania species Tawa, which is that fish they went for like $600 that Gary Lang put up. They're really cool. It's those little red tail guys. Gorgeous fish. He's got some. He's local. I'm just going to wait until he breeds them out, and then I'll like mug him or something. All right. So that's it. That's kind of the first couple things. I guess like the last thing about doing fish for sale is my goal is to work with a couple of the locals here, as far as I'm concerned, that will ship fish. So that it's something like I can go out on, say, a Saturday, see either Jason or potentially Bob, depending on how things shake out, whatever, and deliver fish, hang out, maybe shoot a video, do that kind of stuff. Just because my schedule is only getting worse when it comes to work, because we're in like super crunch time, and it's really going to be busy until at a very minimum the end of the year. And then I've got, other stuff I'm trying to take care of. So like once that alleviates some, then I want to try and really force my way through to get the Aquatic Master Horticulturist program done so that you guys can have access to that. because I want it done. I want to be able to deliver that unto the world and have people enjoy it and use it. So yeah, that's kind of the good news there. So from there, we can do questions and answers. You guys can ask pretty much anything tonight, just because I didn't have a huge topic tonight. I normally would have something planned, but my weekend and the last 2 days have been so crazy busy that my normal planning time got hooked right out the window. So I barely made it here on time. I got to my house 10 minutes before I was supposed to go live, only to find that my internet's all screwy. Fun times, right? So that being said, the easiest way to get my attention to answer your question is to put @BentleyPasco. It highlights for me. It makes it real easy. It's bright orange. I can't possibly miss it. Sort of like what Hoon Aquatics did for those of you in chat, where it's @BentleyPasco. Can't tell too well from your Instagram video, but colors look similar to the Upper Tor. So it's the Upper Tor River fish. It's a wild guess, though. That is a wild guess, and it's not correct. But I like where your head's at. And yeah, they're tiny, tiny fish, and the video is done from afar on purpose. I don't want to spoil it too fast, because I'll eventually do a video on that particular fish, because it's really cool. Yeah, and I'm super glad a lot of you guys who are in chat, I've seen quite a few of you comment, have been really liking the video kind of interview conversation. I would argue it's more of a conversation than an interview with Jason. That's been doing very, very well, which is nice. And Jason's been getting a nice bump in his subscribers, which I think is well deserved, because he does a nice kind of chill live stream. He's building a fish store. It's a cool experience to kind of watch a fish store build from the ground up, right? Because like we all know Aquarium Co-op, and Corey's told his story, and he's shown all sorts of stuff, and he used to have like the day in the life series where he'd literally like walk you through every day of what it was like to be operating a fish store. But you didn't get to like really watch it come from an empty space to a fish store, whereas Jason's starting to show that and talk about that. It's really, really cool. Okay, so I've got a couple questions. I'm going to get through those real fast. Mike Baker, Bentley, been colony breeding mixed fancy guppies in multiple tanks for 1 to 2 years. Now all mostly males. This normal over time with male harassment or something I'm doing. So, Mike, one thing that's really common with guppies is that temperature and some other water parameters can dictate the ratio of male to female in your tank. So what I would look at is like start looking at your temperature first. Temperature is the most common. It will increase based on temperature. The rate of males versus females will either increase or decrease, right? You'll either have very female heavy, which, as I recall, and I'm not perfect because I'm not a super guppy breeder, is cooler water, more females, warmer water, more males. And I've also noticed that like certain times a year, in the case of my guppies, I will see significantly more males being born than I do females. And then when I get to like other times of the year, it'll start to switch and I'll see more females start showing up. There is a possibility of predation, but typically with a kind of like your standard fancy guppy, right, your mutt guppies, you don't see a lot of predation out of them. They tend to be pretty calm as long as there's enough cover for the babies. But it could be, if you have too much density in your tank, then it could be that young females are getting so harassed by males before they're like properly ready. Or it could even be that they try to have one birthing of babies. They don't really have a lot because they're so young, and that stress kills them. I've seen this too. In Endlers is where I've seen it. So it could be if you have too much density of fish in a tank that that could be one of the issues that's coming on. So there's a couple things to look at. First thing I would definitely look at is look at your temperature. I personally think that like a really good mixture for guppies is that like 76 to 78 range. I tend to see pretty good results with my guppies at that, but it could change guppy to guppy, right? I'm talking about a specific line bred Moscow guppy. They're going to act a little different than like Delta Reds or any like generic kind of Cobra guppies or what have you. But the big thing I would first look at is your temperature. If you're running a little hot or you're running too cold, you might see much more specific gender ratios. And really, the guy to ask is right there in chat, Twin Cities Guppies. That guy is your guppy guru. Not to be confused with Guppy Guru, who is another YouTuber. But I would actually talk to Kang, because Kang Lee is the man when it comes to guppies. But just my humble knowledge from what little I know in the guppy world and what I've experienced personally, that's the first thing I'd look at. Cancer Train. I laugh every time I see that name. Are there any high-quality manikapuru angels in the U.S. yet? I don't think so. If there are, they're like being rat-holed by one or two like really, really hardcore hobbyists. I can't say that I know of, and I do not know a lot of distributors, but through some friends I get to see fish lists every once in a while. I don't know anybody that carries them at a distributor level. So that's part of like one of the cool things that Jason has lines on is the ability to get those fish, which me personally, I like at least the picture I found, which is the red back, where they only have the strong red on the top, right? And they still have that scalari look to them in the lower portions of the body. I personally like that a lot more. I actually like that more than the red koi guppies. Or guppies. Angelfish. Red koi guppies too. But I think part of that is I grew up with just an absolute love of the generic like Scalari and Altum angels, because that was the things that like my great grandmother used to breed well before I was ever born, and that my mom likes. So it's one of those things where like I always grew up with Scalari angels, and like if you were doing something cool, you had marble angels back in the 80s when I was a kid. It's like you didn't really have as much as you do now, as much crazy strains, but I love that bars, but then when you have that like just that crazy red shoulder or back, whichever you want to call it, they look really good. Really good. I kind of want those fish. I won't lie. But as we well know, I've got my Leopoldi angels. I love them to death. And I think they're probably the only angels I'm going to have for a really long time, unless I do something real crazy. But we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, I would say I can't say I know anybody that has them in the U.S. yet. Soon, though. Jason will get them in soon. I'm sure that's one of the first things he plans on getting is those bad boys, because they're way too pretty. Omar, do you know of any sister, quotations around sister, plants and aquariums, perhaps some with a symbiotic relationship between one another? Okay, so we're referring to sister as in symbiotic relationship. Yes and no. So there are a lot of plants that exist together in the same areas, and they thrive off similar conditions. So a great example would be in the wild, at least. You will typically find a lot of cryptocorynes in areas where there's also quite a lot of Piptospatha. And you can see the same thing with Piptospatha with Boos as well. They tend to exist in similar areas because they like similar conditions. So a common thing that you can see, for example, depending on where you're looking in the wild, and I know this from watching a Karen Randall presentation, is you'll see crypts down in the main water, and the Piptospatha is all set up on the rock lines that they're closest to, and they basically just sit side by side with each other, and you'll notice that they only exist in the wild right by each other, or right on top of each other in the case of like Boos and Piptospatha. You'll have like a swath of each of them basically intertwined, or budding right next to each other, and nowhere else. You won't ever find them really separated apart from each other. In a lot of portions of the wild, when you find one, you find the other. For certain species. So there's some differences here, right? But as far as like the way we would think of it, like one plant living off the other, not really. You'll have a lot of them that live close to each other or like the same conditions. So you could have something like, say, epiphyte plants that are right near each other, right? Or intertwined with each other in certain places. but you're not really going to find like an epiphyte plant growing off of another plant, if that makes sense. It's just not common for most of the aquatic plants. And keep in mind, you're like the aquatic plants, very few of them actually exist fully submerged in the wild. Some do for portions of the year, and even then, it tends to be a very small portion, like monsoon season or something like that. Most of them exist where a portion of the plant is underwater and all the leaf structure, for the most part, is above water, absorbing atmospheric CO2, which is why they can grow in such large swaths. We don't really see plants in high density underwater at all times. They might be underwater for a couple months out of the year, and that would be their dormant period, so to speak. But for the most part, with a few exceptions, we are going to see them in a kind of immersed or like emergent fashion. Now, there are some plants that do stay underwater all the time. Quite a few of the Ludwigias that grow in portions of the United States, you'll find them in river systems and stream systems, or some lakes where they're just underwater all the time, and that's their natural environment. You can find Aponagitans, for the most part, tend to be underwater a lot, but nothing that's really like a symbiotic relationship. You can have adventitious child plants like Java fern, but that's just the seed on the back acts very differently than almost any other category of plant normally that we see in aquatics. It's really about the closest you get. Cancer train once again. Any reason Bolivian rams are looked over compared to Germans? I feel like Bolivians could be bred to be super red, which would be nice. Plus, they're much easier to care for. I think part of it is just that the breeders who really latched onto them, aka the Germans, when it comes to Microgeophagus ramirezi, they just really latched on to the German blue ram and just worked. Yeah, it's basically purely they worked on those. They got them to a certain thing, and they got a notoriety within the hobby. And when something gets a notoriety, it tends to overshadow a lot of things. And some examples would be like a lot of the Apisto species, right? Apistogramma cockatoides is all over the place in the hobby, and they're gorgeous. But you don't really see like Apistogramma hunsloi all over the place. They're starting to see people like catch on to them, or like Elizabethae, or some of the other Apistos that are out there. And part of that is just that they might have less color, or they only show their color at very certain times, and they don't have those awesome fins, right? I think Bolivian rams are a way cooler fish, personally, because they're so much more versatile, and they can handle such a wide range of parameters. You got to keep rams hot, and there's not a lot of things you can keep in the same tank really hot, other than like a discus and a few tetra species. And it limits what you can keep. And then again, when you start getting that hot, you start losing out on a lot of plants you can keep. There's tons of plants that are just like, nope, I do not like that temperature later. You know? So I think I like Bolivian rams a lot more personally, but I'm also not, how to put this, if I'm going to keep a small cichlid, any kind of dwarf cichlid, it is most likely going to be one of the crebensis species, and that's purely because I keep rainbows. Rainbows like slightly harder water, or at least more mineral-rich water, so the crebensis just tend to do better in those kind of tanks. Plus, I love the fact that the females are way prettier than the males. And yeah, here's a great example. It's like McMasteri, Papagaei. There's tons of really, really cool Apistos out there that do not get enough love. And they should. Just like some of the smaller cichlids that don't have a lot of color, like your checkerboard cichlids and stuff like that, they're not as popular, partially because they don't have that notoriety. Like, I think anybody who's been in the hobby for at least a year knows what a German blue ram is. They can picture it in their head. It's that cover stealer, right? It's that photo opportunity fish. It's that centerpiece fish. Whereas a lot of the other ones where the color's not as bright and vibrant, you don't see like that on the picture, like the poster child of a lot of things, right? And I think that's just kind of ends up causing things that naturally happen in the hobby. And it's going to happen. Like, we're going to have a fish that is way prettier than something very similar to it. And that one that's way prettier is going to get more attention, even if it's a far more finicky pain in the butt fish to keep. Which is sad, because I would rather see more people take the easy fish, right? And get used to that fish and go, okay, now how can I challenge myself? I've mastered Bolivian rams. Now maybe I want to move on to German blue rams because they're a little harder, right? I think it basically starts with more and more people giving a lot of love to those and moving from there. John Cox is actually talking about something that's also cool. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of fish also get popular because of their behavior. Like, the great example he's got there is the multifasciatus shell dwellers. Their behavior and not color is what makes them super popular, because they get along so well in the way they act around humans and stuff like that. They're a really cool fish. Or, like, think about blood parrots, right? They are so personable. They want to interact with you. They practically just want you to pet them like they're a puppy at all times. That is way more interesting. And they look a little doofy, right? There's something, like, adorably cute about how dorky they look with that face. But that's part of what makes them popular, right? Is that super personality, that want for interaction all the time. That hooks a lot of people to getting into those kind of fish. Whereas you think about, like, a dovai, right? Big, angry monster fish that, like, starts this small, it's totally timid, and then they get big and they're huge and angry. Not a lot of people get into that, right? That kind of behavior is not as fun as, like, oh, look at that cute little, like, orangish redfish that wants me to pet it like it's a dog. You know, I've seen so many people that do tricks and stuff with their blood parrots, and I sit there for a little bit and I'm like, okay, that could be fun. And then I remind myself that, like, I have, like, a serious rainbow addiction, and that, you know, certain illicit substances would probably be cheaper, but they're not as colorful and pretty. Okay. Clay D, I want to make sure that your question, that I'm not skipping one real fast, but, okay. Do you hatch live baby brine? Yes. If so, have you tried the co-op eggs? No. And the reason why is just I have enough left over from the last time that I split an order from Brine Shrimp Direct that I don't have a reason to buy more eggs yet. I can't verify anything they've said about hatch rates and all that stuff. You know, I'm sure it's fine. I think the fact that they're using a smaller container is actually good for general hobbyists, because, like, those giant tins that I buy from Brine Shrimp Direct, most people don't need that much, right? And if you do, they're going to be like me, where, like, I have a can I still have a full can that's unopened, and I have half a can in the freezer to keep it nice and cold, and then I've gone through another full can from the last time I ordered, like, 2 years ago. They last you a long time, unless you're breeding at the rate that, like, say, Dean does, which I don't. But I still feed quite often. I like to feed live baby brine to even full adult rainbows, because it keeps that instinct to hunt for little microorganisms. And also, like, you give them that kind of food, they get pretty randy, they get pretty happy, they show you some really nice colors, and that's always fun. You just give them a couple squirts of live brine and watch the colors go hog wild. But yeah, so, and I mean, yeah, so you got, Hoon Aquatics has been using them, there you go. The eggs are really good, 99% of the eggs will float to the surface after hatching. I just wish there were more eggs in the container. And, like, one of the qualms, and I'll say this now, I got a video coming out for it eventually, there was a poll about it for members, I let members have a choice on this one, about the Zis brine hatcher, is that if you don't have super floaty eggs when they hatch, there are certain spots in the Zis that, like, piles of used eggs will bundle up, and it can be a real pain unless you have, like, several sieves to clean them out in order to get just the brine away without having to do some, like, you know, weird sifting techniques or using a container and letting it sit by a light to attract them to one side away from the eggs. Dumb stuff like that. But it's a gripe, and I think it's a reasonable gripe, because I don't think any product should be based on if you're only using the eggs for that product provided by one company, if that makes sense. I think it's unfair to expect everyone to only buy the one brand of eggs I keep to make this item good. I think the item should be good on a standalone. But overall, I think the hatcher is actually pretty decent. So, there's that. However, yeah, I once I get through all my eggs, like when I get to where I'm doing a lot more baby fish, when I can do my garage and all that stuff, which, like, I say that, it's, God, COVID's making this such a nightmare. It's probably going to be first quarter next year before I can even get close to that. It's going to be a while. But yeah, when I start ramming through all what I've got left, then yeah, I'm definitely going to buy some of the stuff from Co-op and give it a try. Like, I've tried Brine Ship Direct. I'm pretty happy with their advertised 90% hatch rate. I think it's actually slightly higher than that, but yeah, I'll definitely try it at some point. Definitely will try it at some point. I'm a little upset at Corey because he never reads my questions out of chat and live stream. Even though I'm one of his mods, he ignores it at all times. I had a good question last night. I felt. He ignored it. Then I had to go back to work. So yeah, kind of a follow-up that we're talking about baby fish food. Do I use golden pearls? No. And part of the reason I don't use golden pearls is this. It's not easily available without doing an online order in my area. Whereas if I need a powdered food, I can easily go get Ceramicron. And I like supporting my local stores with foods like that, because a little tin of Ceramicron goes a really long way. So, yeah, I like doing the Ceramicron personally. I still think golden pearls is probably a slightly better food. I have some that Gary Lang gave me the last time he was in town. But beyond that, like, yeah, I don't personally order golden pearls. I probably would have a better reason to use it, but if I were going to go that right, what I would actually probably do is take the Extreme Krill Flake and put it in a mortar and pestle and grind it to a powder. Because I love that stupid food. And there's a video coming out for that, I think, this Saturday? I think that's right. It might be next Saturday. I love that dumb food. And I'm not sponsored on it. I'm not one of the brand ambassadors anywhere. I pay for all mine. I love that stuff. Probably too much. And one of the other things you could do, like, this is kind of getting mentioned, is you can use chlorella powder, which is way cheaper to buy than, like, golden pearls and that stuff. But yeah. Yeah, there's that stuff. So, things like that. Ninja Storm MC. Number one advice for keeping algae at the lowest possible when starting a new planted tank. I'm going to start my 50 gal in about a week. So realistically, if you want to keep algae at an extreme low, there's kind of three things you can do. Number one is have an insane amount of plants to start. I'm talking like 80% of your substrate or more covered in plants. Seriously, like a ton of plants. Because then those plants are going to sit there and they're going to need so much more food than everything else while they're settling in that the algae doesn't have anything to really feed off of. Number two, you could have slightly less plants, say 50% coverage, and inject CO2. You don't need to have a lot, but a little goes a long way. And having injected CO2 causes the plants to uptake way more nutrients. And again, it starves out the algae. So you're going to get some level of diatom algae, kind of no matter what. That just happens. But you can still get a significantly reduced amount by doing these two things. Third, have your light incredibly low. You have to know your plants really well to do this. You basically have to know the absolute minimum amount of light you can give your plants to help them be healthy, but then not let a lot of excess light be there so that algae can't build up. It's a tough ball game. Like, you're going to get some amount of algae, typically diatom, especially the brown algae, when starting a new tank. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's okay. Don't be too scared of algae. What you don't want is like massive algae outbreaks, right? But a little bit of like algae on the glass and some dust algae on your hardscape, that's fine. That's a healthy sign in your aquarium. That's telling you you've reached a certain stage. But there's ways to kind of fight it. And yeah, Jeff Chambers was mentioning in chat, AquaPros had a pretty legit comparison video with CO2 versus not, and the difference was pretty significant. Yes, I think the only thing that I was watching part of that, well, listening is more accurate, while I was doing some stuff at work. And I think the only thing that I didn't necessarily like, and that's probably because I didn't get far enough in the video, is he didn't directly mention exactly how much CO2 he was pushing in. Like, he had a checker in there, but I don't care about those. What I care about is the size of tank versus the bubbles per second. Because you can have something that says you're doing 30 parts per million of CO2, but you have enough, turnover at the top of the water that a lot of that CO2 is gassing off for the excess CO2, right? Versus if you have a more still tank, that same bubble per second rate could be causing significantly more CO2. So there's some little stuff in there that I didn't hear. I'm not saying he didn't mention them, because it's very possible. Like, it was like a 15-minute video, and I watched like 6 minutes of it. So I can't really say I know perfectly. But, Mike does some good videos. I'll definitely give Mike some credit. AquaPros does some cool stuff. He's doing some interesting experiments. I will say that they are not, for a guy who has a science background, they are not the most scientific approach, but it's good enough for aquariums, if that makes sense. Yeah. Guillermo, I know you have experience with rainbows and was wondering how many Chalatherina eleni, such a good fish, no matter which catch location it is, by the way, whether it's Wapoga or Sirawu, they're both amazing, would you fit in a 55? So, a couple of questions. How are you planting it, if you're going to put plants in there? And then what's your filtration? Also, what's your water change schedule? Because those three will tell you a lot. The big thing about eleni don't get really big. They tend to be like 3 to 3.5 inches. Females will be about 3 inches. Males get about 3.5 at adult size. They don't get super huge. So you can have quite a few more. I think a good group that will give you like nice schooling behavior and all that kind of stuff for a 55 gallon would be something like 12. Now, if you really put a lot of filtration in there, they're Chalatherina. Chalatherinas love flow. They love to swim into flow. They are constantly moving kind of fish. Not quite as like bad as some of the other Chalatherinas, like Centonienses. Like, they don't stop moving ever. You could have like 15, and you could have more if you're like filtering it. You're doing like water changes every 3 days of 50% or something. You could certainly have more, but I think if you were doing a 50% water change once a week, or maybe even like a 30% once a week, 12 to 15 is not unreasonable. If you're not doing like heavy planting, and keep in mind, heavy planting still leaves them lots of room to swim. So you might do like lots of crypts in the bottom, for example, or lower lying plants, and not too many big plants that take up lots of room because they like that upper and middle water range to swim. Heavy planting will let you do more. If you're doing a little lighter planting, right? Like maybe you have more rock and wood, or maybe you just have a more open tank and just a little bit light planting to it, then I would look more than like 10 to 12 range. And just have good filtration. Give them some decent flow. Give them good water changes and good food. Don't overfeed them. That's the big thing. Like, don't overfeed them too much, because that can cause issues. You should be fine. Should be fine. Really good fish choice. 55. While I'm personally not a fan of the 55-gallon tank, they're really good for rainbows. They really are. Ninja Storm, just kind of a follow-up here. Oh, gotcha. Thank you so much. If there is very high light, a good amount of CO2 injection, heavy planted, and consistent water change about 50%, would it be unlikely for huge outbreaks to occur. It is fairly unlikely. However, if you are going to see an algae outbreak, it is during the first, 2 weeks to a month when all of those plants are settling in, especially if you're doing tissue cultures or something that is farm raised and it has to convert. That's where the risk is the highest, because when it's doing all that conversion time, it's not wildly growing, and there's a lot of extra stuff that's like leaf matter and stuff that's going to get let go that was immersed grown, or in the case of tissue cultures, there's some wonkiness that can occur depending on the plant, because they'll start so small that's where algae has an opportunity to break through. So a lot of times what I tend to do is I bring my lights a lot lower when I'm starting a tank for the first, say, month. So if I was doing, say, a Fluval 3.0, my favorite light, if I'm going to run it at 100% when I'm fully going in a season tank, if I'm starting that tank out, I'm only running 50%. Maybe 60, 65, depending on if it's a taller tank or, if you're running quite a lot of CO2. That just gives me an opportunity to let the plant settle in and adjust. And then once they've adjusted and I start seeing plenty of good new growth inside of my tank, that's when I start dialing that light up and maybe even dialing that CO2 up. I might have a little less CO2 to start because I'm not giving it as much light and I don't want to give it too much fertilizer. Makes it pretty easy. So that should help you. And again, if you have some struggles, don't stress too much. We all screw up. I have algae in plenty of tanks. I just deal with it. It just happens, right? It's part of aquatics. Bam. Brian Napple, the other rainbow fish Brian in the house. What's up? You got two Brians that are both rainbow fish fans that I talk to relatively regularly. Curious about how to appease the YouTube algorithm. Trying to give me plugs right there. I can't often watch live. I'll often turn you on, but not be present. When I rewatch, I'll stop, finish it in pieces. The thing is, for YouTube's super magic, did y'all see that? Fish just freaking out over there. Anyway, to make YouTube happy, the things that it pays the most attention to. So if you're already a subscriber, if you regularly watch someone's videos, you don't have to watch it the day it comes out, but let's say somebody who releases a video every Saturday, you watch it, Monday or Tuesday. Liking, commenting, and especially if you share anything, those really get the YouTube jollies going, apparently, because that's the best stuff for the algorithm. And it's one of those other things where people who have YouTube Premium, for example, YouTube Premium is actually worth more to a creator than watching all the ads. Now, I personally don't run a lot of ads on purpose. I got really pissed off at YouTube when I tried their mid-roll ads for a little bit and realized they were shoving 1 million of them into a video, and that drove me absolutely crazy. So I don't care so much about that kind of stuff. Really, it just comes down to if you like and comment, that interaction with a video is what really helps the YouTube algorithm. And if you're not every time you get a video that say if a person gets on average 2 to 3 subscribers in a video, but instead on some video they get 10 subscribers, that is another thing that if more people than usual subscribe because of a single video, it pushes that video a lot higher in the priorities, even no matter how few views it can be. There's all sorts of weird little things. It all comes down to interaction. The more that people show, I like this content and I want to interact with it, the happier it makes magical YouTube algorithms. Which, whatever. I don't care how to put this. I don't care so much about that I'm going to be a professional YouTuber. This is my hobby. This is my fun. This is my hobby of my hobby. Now, do I have it monetized so that I can buy stuff and monkey with things without it absolutely demolishing my wallet? Yeah, of course. Do I make a lot of money off YouTube? No. Not for the, especially not for the amount of time I spend. But yeah, that's the stuff. It really is just like whenever you watch it back, if you just even just give it the thumbs up, that is one of the big things. But if it's like and comment are the two big things. Like those two really push videos quite a lot. They help creators a ton. So for your favorite creators, when you watch their videos, if you can, give it a like, even a little comment, even if it's just like, I like the way you talk, sir, or whatever, some dumb thing. It helps. Okay. Jeff Chambers. I don't get the hardcore scientific vibe from Mike, but I appreciated the visual side by side. Yeah, and so Mike has like a science degree, right? He does have a good background in science, but a lot of times like heavily scientific videos bore the heck out of people watching YouTube. They don't want that. And so I think he does a really good job, especially with that, like that side by side was perfect, right? Showing people is a big thing. There's some things where showing them is just going to be like tons of numbers on the screen and it's boring. But in that case where you're showing like, here's a tank with CO2, here's a tank without CO2, everything else is basically exactly the same. Let's watch what happens. Perfect way to show it, right? Just show it. Don't tell people, show it. And it's a great video. Like, I didn't watch a ton of it because that's what I do. I know the information he's presenting, but I just wanted to see how he was presenting it. He did a good job. Guillermo, it's a fully planted. I got the standard plant pack from Dustin's Fish Tanks. Have a hang on back Aqua Clear 50 and a sponge filter, power head for flow. I'm ready for those water changes. 12 is my goal. Cool. Yeah, just keep in mind like you're gonna deal with conversion because a lot of those plants are from a farm. They're not fully converted yet, so just be ready for that to happen. Don't give up if you start seeing leaves falling off stems. They've got some time. They'll be stronger. You'll be all right. Jason, what are you doing, man? Thanks for the $20 sticker, bro. Now I'm gonna have to buy you tacos. Stephen P. Do you think it would be worth it for me to get more Luminatus, or is 6 okay? 6 is fine. They'll breed at 6 as long as you got males and females. The big thing is, how many females do you have versus your males? For the pictures, it looked like you had more males than females. What you really want to do is, if you want more, try to get at least one female for every male, possibly upwards of like 1.5 to 2 females per male, and then you'll see like the best behavior out of your males, and it'll be the females won't get over harassed by the males trying to spawn, and that's a really important thing. Brian K, not to be confused with Brian N, do you have any Rads? Not currently. I will eventually. I like Rads. I especially like the Tewa Creek Rads, which I would have to get from Mr. Roseline 17 most likely, because he's the one I know that has them most commonly available. There is some locals that have the Ceres Creek Rads, and they've been breeding them so prolifically that I haven't had the necessity to get them right away, if that makes sense. Also, just tank space hasn't allowed it. Mr. Joaquin, why is your water level so low? You weren't here earlier. That one's due for a water change, but at the same time, like, the fish don't care. And if I get it too high, as you probably saw earlier, the SAEs that are in there go a little too hog wild and they bang their heads on the lid. So I keep the water level a little lower on my flex because it's a little older. But this is due for a water change this weekend. So it'll go higher by the next stream. Will M, what's your opinion on running a airstone all day while using CO2 injection? Yes. That's my opinion. Yes, you should run an airstone with CO2 injection. Yes. The more oxygen you have in the system, the better. Especially if your goal is to see pearling. If you have low oxygen in your system, you're not going to see pearling. Because water will naturally be able to absorb that excess oxygen. Pearling occurs when there is excess oxygen in the water already. And the water has no room really left to absorb the oxygen that the plants are creating. That's what causes pearling. So, if your water is not already oxygen rich, you will never see pearling. Because the water will just absorb it. That's the thing. Mr. E. Littles, what do you think is the best male to female ratio for Bosemani rainbows? I tend to like, personally, for every 2 males, I want 3 females. If I'm trying to breed them, I want 3 females per male. And the reason why is I don't want the females to get over harassed, but I want the males to have lots of reasons to show color, to court, and to spar. And if there's plenty of females, they won't spar overly aggressively. Can male-heavy aquariums thrive? Yes. However, females will get over-harassed by the males, and it can impact their health long-term. And what that can do is that extra stress can make them more susceptible to bacteria, especially, and you can start running into bacterial problems that can potentially spread to your nice healthy males because the amount of stress on the females is causing their immune system to weaken. So, in general, at a minimum, 1 male to female when possible. Sometimes you just can't control that because your local fish store never gets females in. Or Dan's Fish, when he orders Blaheri, seems to only get males to show up. And it's not because he orders it that way, it's just how they get shipped. I know this because I asked him on his most recent shipment, did you get any female Blaheri? I kind of need some extra ones. And he's like, no, I got all males again. I'm like, But I have ways to get Blaheri too, so I'm not terribly worried about that, getting good lines of Blaheri. I just was hoping I could cheat and give him some business. Jeff Chambers, YouTube is unwatchable with ads. I pay for YouTube Premium for a reason. I also like making sure that creators get their little chunk, you know, their pennies for me watching, as opposed to getting nothing with an ad blocker. But that's a personal thing. I'm a creator. I respect other creators, right? Got to give them some love. Hello, love all your fish and tanks. Why, thank you, Jossie Experience. I know who you are. Don't think I don't know. Mr. Joaquin, what is a good quality food for tropical fishes? There's quite a few. That depends on whether you want frozen food or like a prepared food like a pellet or a granule or flake, right? Personally, I've used quite a few. There are things I really, really like. It depends on the diet of the fish. So if you're talking your like most common tropical fish where they want slightly more protein than anything else, I think realistically, and you're going to see a video on this Saturday. I think it's Saturday. I really love that extreme krill flake. I've been buying it, and I absolutely love that stuff. I love it, love it, love it. But that being said, if you have fish that need more like spirulina algae or more vegetables, Zoomed makes a spirulina flake that I love to death, and it's dirt cheap for how much you get. There's also, like, you could go to Gemco and get their vegetable flake, which is actually really good food for heavy veggie eaters. I used to say Sarah Oniptaz, but they changed their formula, and now they absolutely suck. I can't stand it anymore, which drives me crazy, because I used to love that food. Man, there's tons. There's so many. The thing is, like, there's so many foods that are formulated to specific fish that you start kind of going down this rabbit hole. It's like, well, if you're keeping this kind of cichlid, then this food. But if you're keeping rainbow fish, then this food. But if you're keeping tetras, then this food. And if you're keeping discus, this food. If you want to enhance red, it's this food. If you want a more natural product, it's this food. Most of the foods nowadays are pretty good. Even just like tetracolor is actually a relatively decent grade food. It's not amazing, and that's why it's cheap, but it's decent. Look at LRB Aquatics, Lucas Bretz. He feeds only tetracolor granules, and all his fish and shrimp look amazing all the time. And that's the only thing he feeds, right? He does a little bit of live every once in a while, but beyond that, that's all he feeds, and it looks good. What it comes down to is a variety in your diet, and not only feeding one food to your fish. So mixing in a little bit of frozen food every once in a while, or live food. Mixing in something that's a little more veggie heavy when you have protein-rich fish to help clear things out of their guts. Using fasting days. Not feeding your fish every single day. Have at least one day a week where they don't get food. Because you want to train their bodies, one, to be able to go a day or two without food, and two, more importantly, get them used to that time off so that if you take a weekend away, they aren't going to go hog wild killing each other or doing something stupid because they don't have food. 3, having that day off of food helps make sure that they don't get any kind of like constipation issues or anything like that where there's just too much stuff in their gut. Fish naturally in the wild don't eat all the time. They don't constantly eat every single day. So trying to help them by not overfeeding your fish and not just non-stop feeding them helps them maintain just a healthier system in general. Hope that helps answer your question, Mr. Joaquin. Oh my god, I found Nemo. I love that name. Hey, Bentley, were you bidding on some Val that was for sale on Aquabid a while ago? No, I would never bid on Val. I can get it any day of the week. However, I'd be curious the username. If you really like to know my Aquabid username, I am this on Aquabid. I am just Bentley on Aquabid. Which I've only bid on one fish in the past, 6 months. And I lost auctions on it 4 times. and then the person running the auctions contacted me directly because he knew me through some other circles and was like, hey, you keep trying to bid on this. I'll just sell them to you direct. Don't stop going through Aquabid. Why didn't you contact me in the first place? I'm like, trying to make it easy on you. All right. I gotta catch up with chat. I'm a little bit behind. Atkins Nature Aquariums. Any thoughts on the Neo CO2 kit if you have seen it? So I have seen the Neo CO2 kit. Long term, I don't think it's worth it. Short term, I think it's cool. I think there is some merit to it. I would need to look at the cost, because to me, I'm fully happy to spend more money up front and get a good regulator and tank that I know is going to last me 9 months plus, and then when I refill it, it's only going to cost me $25. So it just becomes very cheap to operate, and the longer you use it, with which good regulators last an extremely long time. We're talking 10 plus years, right? And many of them at least 5 years. The longer that you operate them, the cheaper and cheaper they end up becoming, and that easier solution like the Neo CO2 where you've got those bottle replacements, or even worse, like the Fluval ones, those teeny tiny ones, they just become more and more expensive over time in comparison. So it's that if you don't want to spend up as much up front and you look at the math and you just go, yeah, that bottle's going to last me this long, I'm spending this much this often, and that's okay, perfect, do it. It's about what fits your budget, right? If you can afford a decent regulator and a good tank, and you're going to constantly have CO2 on multiple tanks or one tank for a long while, I go that route, because I'd rather have that long-term solution in place where I have a 20-pound tank that feeds 3 different tanks, 2 40-gallon breeders and 140-gallon the Guppy Mansion, right? I pump out CO2 to each of those tanks in my low and slow method, as I like to call it, the American barbecue CO2 method, where it's 3 bubbles per second to my 140-gallon tank, and about 3 bubbles, or 2 bubbles every it's 3 bubbles every 2 seconds. I can math 1.5 bubbles per second, roughly, to each of the 40 breeders. That 20-pound tank lasts me 10 months at that rate, feeding all 3 of those tanks. And I'm putting just enough CO2 in to get nice growth, a little bit of boosted color, a little bit of boosted growth, but not go too crazy, even though one tank is horrifically overgrown. I need to trim it really bad. But that fits me. I was willing to make that investment up front, knowing that I'm going to have this regulator for 7 to 10 years, and it's going to just be absolutely bulletproof. But it was an expensive regulator. And then I got a tank used and immediately just did a tank exchange at my local place. It cost me $25 to fill the tank every time I fill it. So it cost me maybe, if we want to do the math, $27 a year before tax to operate my CO2 across 3 tanks. And I only have one other tank that gets CO2, and that tank on it, because it gets the same tank to, or the same 20-pound tank to a single tank, that lasts almost 2 years because I push slightly more CO2 in that particular tank, but not by much. So for me, it makes the operational cost extremely low, and that's more interesting to me because I'd rather not have to buy like those Neo CO2 bottles like every month or whatever, instead of being like, oh, my tank pressure is finally low. I guess in the next month I should probably consider going and doing a tank exchange. Right? It's way less work overall in the long term, and it's significantly more cost effective. But if those Neo CO2 kits fit your budget, they're a really awesome way to have a much lower upfront cost to get CO2 going. Hoon Aquatics, I can get you some Tiwa. Oh, that's right, you've got Tiwa, don't you? I forgot you have Tiwa. Yeah, Tiwas are the ones I want. The Burning Bar are cool, but the Tiwas are the ones I like. I love those things. The Ceres Creek from Marcel pretty much breed in a way to look like Tiwa Creek, but have more of a blue sheen. So Brian, to answer that, I like the Tiwa because of the like really strong black on the outside of the fins and then the orange body. We have Ceres Creek locally, and they have one of two ways that their body turns out. They're either all blue or they're blue with the orangish red color, and they look really cool. Do not get me wrong, but I just really love the way the Tiwas look. So it's just it's a specific color pattern I don't have in other fish that I appreciate. Woo, jumpy chat. Trying to catch up. Patrick's Aquatics, what would you say is the easiest rainbow fish to breed? I've only ever bred cichlids and anabantoids. So they're all kind of similar. I would say that one of the most, like, precocious rainbows in that they will constantly breed every day is actually Chilathrina blaheri. And then probably close second to that is going to be, if you have them right, like, turquoise rainbows will breed like crazy. They like to be a little cooler. You keep them like 74 degrees. They're super happy. And then the next kind of like up the totem pole from that, like Bosemon, breed like crazy. If you're looking at like something, maybe you want more of like the Australian style rainbow fish, I would start looking at something like the Goiter River. Goiter Rivers are really, really easy to breed. John Cox, why does YouTube keep showing me the ads I dislike? I've noticed that like services that have ads and I tell them like I don't like this ad, I do like this ad, they show me the ones I hate all the time. That's what you're talking about. Gabriel C, I'm doing fantastic tonight, man. Every night's great, even when you have like crazy stressful work days. I come home, we talk fish with people, or spend time with the puppies and my lady. It's always good. It's always good, man. Any night I'm home is a good day. Do you have any knowledge on the twin star algae inhibitors? Not exactly sure what they do. So, okay. What they're doing is they're passing a small electric current into a part of the water. And what that does is it breaks the hydrogen and oxygen apart from each other in the water. So it creates just pure oxygen, which is that mist you see. And algae does not do well with very, very high amounts of oxygen, especially like the super microfine mist of pure O2 like that. It effectively acts kind of like how hydrogen peroxide is, which is it oxidizes the algae and kills it. You can make your own if you're clever. I think they are way overpriced. I do not think they should be as expensive as they are. They can be very effective, but they are not the end-all, be-all. You can do things in your aquarium, balance out your parameters, and make it so you don't see algae in the first place. But if you want to invest in it because you like what it does, especially if you like that look of the mist in your water, it doesn't hurt your fish. It has a kind of neat look. It can be really cool. Me personally, I'm not going to spend that much money on it. It's too much money. They're way too expensive. Yeah, it's oh my god, I found Nemo. Like, my fish didn't really like extreme. I'm kind of surprised. Like, but then again, rainbows will eat anything. Bug bites is a really great food. If you haven't tried it, bug bites. I'm still testing this stuff, so that's why I haven't talked about it at all really yet. Bug bites has recently put out a flake food. I actually really like that stuff a lot. The problem is, like, I can only get these teeny tiny containers. I can't get like a big tin of it. I love big tins because I feed so much food, right? Because I have so many rainbows and stuff. They're big hogs. They're big piggy fish. They'll tell you, like, I just ate. I'm starving. I need more food. They're such beggars. But I actually really like that bug bite flake. And part of it is, like, I have rainbow fish. They eat more top water, so I don't want food that sinks too fast. But, yeah, if bug bites works for you, it's based off soldier fly larvae. It's a really nice food. It's actually pretty high quality considering it comes from, like, the big companies, right? I like bug bites quite a lot too, and since they put out their flake, I've been way happier with it than the original stuff, even though I like the original stuff. Try to catch. All right, make sure I'm not missing something. Jeff Chambers, how many ways can you split a CO2 line, or should you have a different line for each? So, you can split it, but guaranteeing that you're getting the right amount of pressure to each of those lines, because pressure does matter quite a lot with a lot of the CO2 regulators. You really want, like, the multiple needle valves where you're adjusting each one. It has its own bubble counter. You can do, like, those 8-way splitters that, was it? Aquatech makes those, right? You can do those. You just need to push, like, a higher pressure rate into those so that when it gets split, it comes down a little bit, right? There's some monkeying that you can do to make that, like, really work. I personally prefer to just have an individual needle valve on each. That's a personal taste, though. So, like, those expandable ones where you can go up to 5, I love those things. But that being said, you could split a line, and as long as each one goes to its own individual bubble counter, and you can kind of dial them some, right, with like a valve that allows you to dial pressure some. If you can control it to get equal pressure across all the tanks that you need, it will work. I wouldn't try to do that more than, like, what is it, like a 4-tier gang valve worth, you know what I'm talking about, where, like, you can put your lines coming from 2 ends and it has 4 outputs. I wouldn't go much more than that, personally, off of a single needle valve. And you'd have to, like, really just have that needle valve full open, cranking like crazy to pressurize enough of those. But, yeah, I mean, I have personal preferences when it comes that way. But there are plenty of people that have done it other ways and had great success. So, don't listen to only me. There's more than just me in the world, right, that has an opinion on this stuff. Mike Baker, my CO2 art regulator from the co-op back in the day, so back when they carried it, was well worth the investment. My 5-gal CO2 tank, I think you mean 5 pound, lasted 2 years at 2 bubbles per second. Yeah, that's getting your money worth. I have 2 different CO2 art regulators, and I like both of them quite a lot. Although I got one used from a person I know, and an internal seal in the regulator had gone bad, so I had to pull the regulator apart and replace the seal. Well, more specifically, my roommate at the time did that for me because he was a nice fella and decided he was going to fix it for me. And it took a little while to get. I lost like an entire 5-pound tank of gas in like 3 days because the seal was busted. And it was like, we're only letting like 2 bubbles a second in this tank. Why are we out of gas? And then we realized there's a broke seal on it. Sucked. All right, I'm going to try and speed this up and get finished because we are getting close to the end here, folks. Atkins Nature Aquariums, thank you. I'm using the kit now for my nano aquarium. Haven't had any issues so far. Refills cost $20, but I haven't experienced how long the refill will last. Yeah, I think in a small aquarium where you're not putting a ton of CO2 into it, it's actually a really good solution, right? Because, like, a giant regulator with a giant tank is going to last you forever on a small tank, where it might be more reasonable to have that small, like, Neo CO2 kit in a small tank, especially if you're looking at, like, that, like, 20-gallon or less range. And you're not doing a ton of CO2. You're not trying to go like ADA where I push 8,000 bubbles a second. Yeah, perfect solution. Mismatched socks at Belly Pasco. Could blackbeard algae in a tank with CO2 be indicative of too much or too little CO2? So here's the thing. I have experienced blackbeard algae in my tanks where I run low CO2. So typically, when we see blackbeard algae in a CO2 environment, because carbon dioxide, it's not so much the carbon dioxide that messes with the algae, it's that the carbon dioxide boosts the growth rate of the plants around it, and it helps starve the algae out. What actually kills algae in our liquid carbons is a compound called glutaraldehyde. Glutaraldehyde is used. So what's the easy way to put this? To bond the liquid carbon. It's not technically correct, but just think of it that way. It makes it a little easier. Glutaraldehyde is an algicide in its own right. So you can get glutaraldehyde on its own, and it's really good if you dose it correctly, just like destroying algae left and right. And that is the compound that's inside our liquid carbon products that actually kills or fights algae. The CO2 itself and the carbon itself really doesn't do too much to the algae. It's that it boosts all the plant growth so that the plants so drastically outcompete the algae that the algae gets starved out. So, a lot of us will say, like, we use CO2 to kill algae. That's not exactly correct, but it is kind of correct at the same time, you know what I'm saying? So usually it's just that the plants aren't fighting for enough of everything in the tank, and there's something that the algae is able to take hold of. Typically with blackbeard algae, it tends to be excessive phosphates. So if you're overfeeding your fish, which I do all the time, because I'm just like quick throwing chunks of food in for my hungry piggy fish, and they eat their food super fast no matter what, because they're rainbows and they'll just have bottomless stomachs. Even little baby ones, I swear they eat like their entire body weight worth of food. It's crazy. And that excessive phosphate from that extra food and the waste and stuff like that can be really, really great for blackbeard algae. So if you like blackbeard algae, that's a way to get it. If you don't like blackbeard algae, try cutting back on your feeding first off. Like if you feed once a day, feed every other day for a little while and see what happens. A little bit of rainbow conversation back and forth. The other Tiffany, Bentley Pasco, what is the O2 CO2 exchange in a tank like for terrestrial plants with roots underwater, such as a peace lily? Okay, so in the case of those, right, what they're doing is they're absorbing their nutrients through the roots, and they're getting atmospheric CO2. So right now, in the majority of the world, the CO2 is at roughly 400 parts per million in the air we breathe. So think about that. We're shooting for like 30 parts per million CO2 in an aquarium. So there's more than 10 times the amount of CO2 at the atmospheric level. So when the plants are emergent like that, they have access to all the CO2 they could ever want or need. Which is why, some of those things like pothos and stuff will grow like hog wild if there's enough nitrates for them to get out of the water, because there's so much CO2 available. It's like having steroids just injected into them, right? If they have enough nutrients to feed on at the same time. If they have all the carbon in the world they could ever need, but there's no nutrients for them to balance that out, they're not going to grow super fast. So it's kind of a mixture of the two. Chuck Davis, alternatives to Easy Green. I need something quick, something from Lowe's maybe. Most of the stuff you're going to get at Lowe's, what I would say is if you have a like local aquaponics or hydroponics shop, you could look into a lot of their fertilizers, because they tend to be designed to work in aquaculture-oriented environments, so they tend to be safer and closer aligned to like the aquarium fertilizers we use. They just need to be in extremely low doses. Most of the stuff that you're going to find at Lowe's is not designed for that, and it's going to have either significantly higher amounts of ammonia. Typically it's in ammonium, because instead of using, potassium nitrate, they'll use ammonium nitrate, which is what happens in like examples being people use it for DIY root taps. Osmocote. So what that does is it leaves excess ammonium, which at low levels is safe in your tank. But as that starts building up, it becomes extremely dangerous for your fish, just like ammonia. And when we look at an ammonia test, that ammonium will also show up on an ammonia test as well as actual ammonia. Now, for the most part, in a lot of our tanks, ammonium is extremely safe until you get to extraordinarily high pHs. We're talking like pH of 11 or higher. That's when it becomes extremely toxic. But as that level of ammonium builds up, it then becomes extremely dangerous regardless of the pH that your water sits at. So really, really, alkaline water makes ammonium more dangerous and ammonia less toxic, whereas softer water makes ammonia extremely toxic and ammonium pretty safe in low levels. So that's where somebody actually asked us, like, have you seen anywhere where it actually proves that ammonia is in XYZ? And I had to go into like the extra details of this. I cut it short because it's simple to digest that way, but like Osmocote, for example, being used in an aquarium, it's technically ammonium that is actually the danger, not actually ammonia, but they come up the same on the test. So it's simplifying things to make it easy to understand. Levi S. I am trying to fix Safety Zorb, have some in a bucket, testing what it does to the water. So far, it drastically decreases the KH and pH. But yeah, it just strips, like, everything out of the water. It strips tons of stuff out of the water. But yeah, that's something you're going to see for a while. And it'll do it for quite a bit. It can hold a lot of stuff. All right, I'm going to get these last two questions real fast, and then we will call it a day. We did start a little bit late because Comcast is a jerk. But I have some puppies I have to let play, and I need to get dinner. So and I'm pretty sure my lady would actually like to see me tonight more than just the, hi, honey, I'm home. I got to go start my stream for running in the door. The other Tiffany, for terrestrial plants, yes, they get their CO2 from the air. Does the roots affect CO2 or the O2 in the tank, though maybe at night? No, not really. I mean, the roots are not where the plants, because all your chlorophyll and stuff sits in the leaves, right? So that photosynthetic process where it's going to eventually off-gas oxygen and consume carbon, and then later in the reverse, it's going to consume small amounts of oxygen and exhale CO2. That all happens at the leaves because that's where all the chlorophyll and all the things that are necessary for the photosynthetic process to occur. At the roots, basically, they're just there to absorb your nitrates, your phosphates, and all that kind of stuff, right? Magnesium, boron, all those nice micro and macronutrients, which are all basically salt in the grand scheme of things, a type of salt. So, no, not really. The roots are pretty safe. Like, I have a Dracaena, I think that's the plant. I'd have to look it up to make sure. That grows out of my, like, 29-gallon acrylic that has a bunch of mixed rainbows in it. And it's got, like, big chonkin roots, but I don't have to worry about anything in that because all the leaf structure is out of the water by a window. Brian, thanks for giving me something better to watch than the debate. All right, man. I'm glad that I'm at least a little better than the debate. You're welcome. Bill Coleman, Feather Pasco, have you seen female rainbows sparring? I've watched a couple of my neon females sparring, or what looks like sparring. Yeah, so you will find eventually that certain females become effectively like a dominant or an alpha female, and they will kind of like get semi-territorial, usually if they're trying to protect the better spawning territory in their minds. And they're trying to protect that area so that when they want to spawn with a male, they get that particular area that they want, that they think is the best for the chance of their eggs becoming babies, like that instinctual, subconscious kind of thing, right? It can happen. Usually it's nothing to worry about. They're not really going to hurt each other. Even rainbow males, when they spar, typically don't hurt each other until they, like, get dumb and run into something, which rainbows do that all the time, which is why you'll see, like, the banged up mouths and stuff. But beyond that, no, you're fine. All right, one last thing. Leslie's Aquatics. Hi, Leslie. Also, hi, Fish Dreams. I'm feeling a little deflated tonight. I've had a pair of bettas in a tank together for 3 days and nothing. I'm grateful they aren't trying to kill each other, but dang. Are you 3 days? 3 days? If I put you in a room with somebody within 3 days, should I expect you to be like, we're going to have children? Give him time. Let him settle in. Maybe the female isn't like bulked up enough with enough eggs, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, if you had jam me in a room with some random stranger for 3 days, I'm not going to be like, you know what? I want you to have my children. No! You'd be lucky if I don't choke them. Just like, please just give me space. Just give me some space. I don't have fish. I have nothing to relax. I'm going to go crazy. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can never really anticipate. Like, sometimes you'll get that betta, and that you'll put that male, you'll have that male for like a day, and then bam, you already got a nice like bubble nest ready, and that guy's just like, anytime a lady comes around here, I'm gonna show her the goods. Babies, right? It's like natural Barry White. He's just mentioned Barry White. Give him a nice movie, you know, it's like a little rom-com, some Barry White. Nice dose of bloodworms. Bam. That'll do the trick. If you're in my case, you're right. You have your dojo loach that almost never watches the TV unless Gordon Ramsay's on TV. And then Danger Noodle flops down in the front of the tank and watches Gordon Ramsay until the show's over, and then goes away. It's hysterical to watch. All right, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. Brian, Jason, thank you so much for the super chats. I really, really appreciate it, guys. Also, I know they already left, but Danikin Aquatics, just in case you watch the tail end of the replay, thanks for becoming a member. Greatly appreciate it. For those of you out there, if you haven't given it the like for the magic YouTube algorithms, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me in chat. For those in the replay, I hope you've enjoyed this stream, a little bit of talk. I hope you're excited about some of the stuff we talked at the start. Got some fish. They're going to start coming for sale. Woo! It's going to be good times. Going to be fun. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there. And stay awesome.